everybody today for joining us. Our colleague Justin is not from Children's, is not able to join us today, but I think Dave and I will fill the shoes that he was to provide. So for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Geoffrey Pinski. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Tech Transfer here at the University of Cincinnati. As we'll talk today about the ins and outs of industry interactions. I get involved in those interactions through tech transfer, which is this form of transferring things developed from your labs into the hands of industry, with the hopes that they will take it forward and build impact and create new products from those things. Dave, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Geoffrey. My name's Dave Fullmer. I'm the director on the Cincinnati Children's side in the Office of Sponsored Research. So my office takes point on all aspects of research-related collaborations, from foundations to NIH to industry, which is what we're talking about today. We do things from pre-award all the way to post-award and accounting, and my office specifically deals with the contracts, which we'll be talking a lot about today.
Thanks, Dave. And everyone, please feel free to, if you have questions, to shoot a message in the chat. I've got the chat open, so as we go forward, we'll try to make sure we answer any questions, and we'll certainly have time at the end as well. So let's see if I can get this to work. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about culture and the differences between universities and research institutions and industry. We're going to talk a little bit about the types of interactions with industry, what those outcomes can look like, and how each of our different institutions actually have, in some ways, in some places, similar processes, but in other ways, different processes. This all starts with culture, right? So what we want is alignment, right? It is about finding places where we are good at one thing and the industry partner is good at something else. And the place where these collaborations meet is where there is a strong synergy. But there are differences. They are differences in why, right? Aims versus milestones and deliverables. Aims, as I'm sure you all have this sense of, are broad and exploratory. They're open to exploration, changes in direction. Whereas industry, when they come and they have projects in mind, they are very focused. They are clear timeline-driven deliverables. They have a clear goal. They expect certain types of outcomes. In timelines, you see differences as well. In academia, no-cost extensions and expansions of programs is fairly common. The awardee from the NIH is generally hands-off. They set a project, they set some times, but as projects expand and slow down and change, they're very gracious with opening up more time. And it's for the whole thing, right? This timeline is expected for the 2-3 years. With industry, projects can change based on a result midstream. There's expectations of regular check-ins to ensure projects are on track, going back to those deliverables and those milestones. And they often exist for each portion of the project. Phase 1, expectations that it's done in 6 months so that phase 2 can start. The culture around publication is also very different. The expectation in academia is that everything can be disclosed. Everything should be shared. Everything is new knowledge that we should produce to better society. And publication is often consistent with a journal requirement. When interacting with industry, there are certain things that you may not be able to disclose. A simple example is if an industry partner comes to you with a compound and it's their compound. They may very much not want you to share the structures. Whereas, as I'm sure many know, the stronger the journal, the more expectation is that the structure has to or should be shared. Industry expects that opportunity to look at it, to look at that publication, to make sure that their interests are protected. Now, we work very hard, and Dave and I can tell you some fun back and forth with negotiations around this, but we work very hard to make sure that our right to publish is protected. But that often does come with expectations of opportunity for that industry partner to have time to review, to have time to make sure that we aren't disclosing something that's confidential to them, something that maybe is protectable and that we need to sort out how best to protect it. Which leads into intellectual property. In most scenarios in academia, we see this all the time at UC and children's, where faculty just walk across the street, knock on the door and say, hey, I'm working on X, you're working on Y, let's get together and figure out what cool things we can do, right? It's collaborate now, figure out ownership later, none of that matters, our institutions will figure it out. There's also an expectation that everyone in the room is part of the IP. And there's a general sense of attribution is important. Whereas when we interact with industry, ownership probably needs to be discussed up front. Again, going back to those deliverables and those milestones, industry is very much wants to make sure they know what they're getting from this project around IP. They may expect different levels of control over the results. Again, going back to the publication conversation we just had. And they want oftentimes control over what's next after the project is over, what they get to do with what has been developed. That takes us to, so we've talked a lot about the differences. So how do we actually find that middle ground on those differences, right? How do we actually talk to industry, right? But we've set out some things that might be scary and concerning, but there's a whole bunch of benefit. Industry research, industry interactions oftentimes create some of the best science, some of the best collaboration. Because again, the best science comes from the diversity of thought, comes from people coming from different places, different ideas, different reasons why they're there. And so part of the reason both of our offices, my office and Dave's office exist, is because we as an institution recognize that, and we want to help support it. So where might they talk to you? Well, they might come up to you at conferences. They might come talk to you after seeing a presentation and a publication. In the community, they might come to you, I mean, at any number of places. So, but how do we engage with industry, right? Well, we encourage you to talk to them at conferences. We encourage you to talk through your network. You know, I'm sure many of you have colleagues that were in your PhD program or were a postdoc in the last lab you were in, and they, instead of going off into academia, they've gone off into industry. That is a wonderful way to help create industry interactions and industry partnerships. Why? Well, because you already have a relationship. You already have a sense of why they're trying to do what they're trying to do. Our offices, the tech transfer offices, also do outreach, right? We are looking for partners for the intellectual property that's not being funded, not coming out of it necessarily an industry partnership, but also we are looking for anyone that wants to learn more about your skills and your talents and your contributions to the scientific arena, because that creates, again, going back to that slide about potential benefit, it creates new things that have that chance to impact society in a way that we may not be able to do it on our own. We want you to engage. Just think about things, right? Keep things in mind, right? Industry reps are always curious about the latest state of the art. They always want to be on the cutting edge. That's the goal of most companies. They want to be at that cutting edge. And because we publish, right? Because you're also at that forefront, that cutting edge, share. There's no harm in anything that you've already shared and disclosed out there to share that with anyone without even talking to anyone else. You've already published it. It's available. Please, it is by far one of the strongest pieces of marketing that any of our offices can do. But keep in mind that if you're sharing things that haven't already been published, you want to have some cautious, some concern perhaps about how to do that. And there are ways to do that. And we have processes, both institutions, on confidentiality, and we can help make that still happen, just with some protections. And always, right? Always get their contact info. Figure out who they are, what they're doing, so that we can help if need be. Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about outcomes from these different interactions?
I would love to. Thank you, Geoffrey. So you had these initial conversations with our industry partners, and both sides are interested in developing some type of relationship. The outcomes are pretty standard here. I mean, the outcomes are to come to agreement on what that collaborative work looks like, to put an agreement in place with terms and conditions that protect both sides, that have both sides' interests in mind, come to an agreement on the intellectual property associated with those agreements. And that's sometimes the hardest part of these industry agreements, is hashing through that part, and frankly, the most timely portion of it. And then ultimately do the research and get great results, and then publish as a result of that. So when it comes to putting the agreements in place, there are many different types of agreements in play for industry partners and federal partners, and the whole gamut. A lot of those agreements are very simple, non-funded agreements, like material transfer agreements or data transfer agreements. And these are simple agreements that allow for one party or both parties to share a material with the other party with protections in place. Generally not funded. Generally, the person sending the material retains ownership of those materials, and we can use them, make modifications and such. Geoffrey alluded to NDAs and CDAs. These are also non-funded agreements designed to protect discussions, designed to protect the disclosure of things that you haven't already published. These things are important to get in place early on in your conversations, so that you can freely disseminate information with your industry collaborator. So once you get through those initial discussions, you developed a scope of work, you've got a budget in play, the contracting mechanisms then come to the forefront. Very standard contracts are what we call sponsored research agreements. These are the funded research agreements where you have a specific contract in place between the industry partner and either UC or Children's. These will lay out terms and conditions around confidentiality, use of name, ownership of data, intellectual property, all of those common things that you see in contracts. The sponsored research teams at your institutions generally take point on negotiating these types of contracts, and then we'll pull in tech transfer, innovation ventures, or the legal teams on specific sticking points to assist in the negotiations. Sometimes these can be simple, very quick, and get them done in a matter of weeks or months. Sometimes they can be very long negotiations. So it's important to get those in front of your sponsored research teams early on so that we can engage in those negotiations. Other types of industry contracts or clinical trials. This is where we're testing some type of industry drug or device with the intended purpose of studying the outcomes on patients that are enrolled in the study. Generally, two buckets here. The first bucket is industry-funded trials where the industry partner has developed a protocol. They're providing a drug. We're simply enrolling patients into their study, gathering results and sending those results to the industry funder. The other side of this are studies where we've actually developed the protocol and we're going out and soliciting industry partners to provide drug or device so that we can study it. These are negotiated very differently. So it's important to know the difference between the two. The next one is and Geoffrey and Justin, they take point on most of these. These are the licensing or the option agreements. These are our agreements where maybe we've developed a novel device and we have licensed it here and an industry partner wants to gain access to it or vice versa. And these are, there may not be research on one side or the other, but they just want to gain access to that particular intellectual property. Joint ownership and interinstitutional agreements. I think these are mostly on Geoffrey's side. I don't know that we see a ton of them here. So I'll let him dive down that when he jumps on next. And then the last one here is, do we have another one? Oh, subawards. So subawards are multi-tier. So NIH is providing funding to an industry partner to do a particular research project, and that research partner then reaches out to us to do a portion of that work. That would be what's called a subaward, and it can vary in who's providing the initial funding. But examples of that are the SBIR and STTR NIH mechanisms. These are designed for small businesses to team up with industry or college entities to assist them in developing their tech. It's specifically focused at kind of startup companies or really small businesses to get their feet wet in that field. So as I mentioned, intellectual property is generally the toughest area to negotiate. I mean, Geoffrey alluded to this before, that industries focus on, or their stance on IP varies pretty drastically from where our stance or our starting point is. So it's important to outline in the agreement who owns what and who gets rights to what. Our stance is that our typical stance, depending on what the circumstances are, is that we own anything that we develop. Industry would own anything that they develop. We jointly own what we develop together, and that we give each other an exclusive right or a non-exclusive right, or what we call a NERF, license to use it internally for research purposes. And then we negotiate a right on the commercial side, or an option for them to get exclusive rights to whatever that IP is developed. Now, it's all going to vary depending on the circumstance. It's all going to vary on who's bringing what to the table, who's providing what materials, funding involved, things along those lines. But we'll work very closely with tech commercialization, innovation ventures to negotiate what's right and what's beneficial for our side, to ensure that we're getting the protections that we need. So what's the process look like? Geoffrey talked about those initial conversations. That's pretty much stage one of that process. Once you've decided that you want to move forward with some type of collaboration, it's important to start designing your scope of work or your protocol. You may be doing that independently. You may be doing that in collaboration with the industry partner. That's fine. But before we get to the agreement stage, you want to make sure that you pretty much have the scope of work nailed down and that you've worked with your business teams to come up with an appropriate budget, making sure that you've accounted for your time, your team's time, any materials and supplies that are needed, and incorporate the appropriate overhead or F&A rate into the budget as well. Once those things are nailed down, you move on to the agreement stage and we begin negotiations on that front. As I stated, those can be quick negotiations. Those can be very long, drawn out negotiations depending on the circumstances.
Dave, why don't we hold over a second? Tim, you have a question, please feel free to unmute, and what can we answer?
Yeah, thank you. I was the one who like triggered this talk too, because I've had industry reach out like quite a bit recently, and I'm a little scared of them. But my conversation is a lot of people on this call are more junior, right? That they haven't had experiences sometimes working with industry. So what kind of errors do you see kind of that people make where they don't involve you soon enough or should? And kind of would you be able to say like when should you reach out to you all to get advice or to even sit in on conversations to make sure that we don't say something or promise something that we shouldn't, because or to make sure that you think it's a good idea to actually be collaborating with industry in that scenario?
Dave, do you want to take first step?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the answer varies, Tim. All of us are always available whenever you want to reach out and have a quick conversation. And we can get the right people involved at the right stages. The biggest slips that I see from my perspective is on the budget side of things. Make sure you're getting your business team involved in budget conversations and don't overcommit. I mean, the key here is don't give away the farm. Make sure you're really analyzing what our true costs are. I mean, the key here is we don't want to do research with industry sponsors where we have to supplement or we're paying for those costs. Industry should be paying for those costs in most instances. Sometimes that's not the case, but you should be doing that analysis with your business team to make sure it's a win-win for both sides. But I have people reach out to me on a daily basis saying, hey, we have this partnership with Merck and we've started conversations, and would you be willing to attend a call? Always happy to do that. I enjoy doing those types of things. So get us involved early on.
Yeah, to Dave's point, I mean, I think that there are certain areas, and we have a slide here, I believe, coming up about where certain people's different responsibilities lie. So it's often about making promises that you can't keep because you can't make those. For the most part, the area that you will not see an administrator come in and tell you you're doing it wrong is your scope of work. That is something that we don't have the knowledge or information or understanding necessarily of what you need to do in your lab and what they want you to do science-wise. But in terms of IP, if somebody starts asking about IP questions and ownership and assignments and language you're not sure about, the answer there is to reach out to someone, right? I would generally recommend if you hear the word IP and you're not sure, reach out to Tech Transfer, myself or Justin. If it's related to, as Dave put it, to budget and overhead, you don't have authority to negotiate the overhead numbers. You should only be having a conversation about the total cost. And so those are the two big areas, right? And it all comes down to people making promises that they actually can't keep. And we are often happy to be on those calls, to be engaged, to help make sure we can make those promises that help with building those relationships and making sure everyone's comfortable with it. And I guess part of the other answer is it's never too early. Like you get a random call from Merck and you're not sure what to do, pick up the phone, send us an email. We are happy to educate one-on-one scenarios and give advice on how to engage that industry partner to ensure you're doing everything without a potential negative set of outcomes. I mean, there's always still potential, but reducing that risk. Awesome.
You know,
Please
move
keep
on
the
to the next
questions
slide there,
coming.
Geoffrey.
I'm gonna move back into the flow, right? So, we kind of covered this in answer to Tim's question. But some things that are important to remember as we talk about that flow. 2 contracts, rarely are they the same. We want you to engage us early. Don't hesitate. You might think it's a stupid question. It probably isn't. And as we talk about this, it's again making promises you aren't able to keep. So who can negotiate what? So there are various different support resources to help, to Tim's original question, who can actually help? I will talk about UCs, and then I'll let Dave talk a little bit about, reaffirm what we sort of mentioned throughout, right? So at UC Tech Transfer, my office is responsible for material transfer agreements, CDAs, and protecting, transferring intellectual property developed by faculty, by staff. Sponsored research is responsible for industry-funded research. So they are responsible for negotiating the contract, although they'll bring us into the loop as things go forward. And then the Department of Business team is the first place to actually start for contracting. They make sure your contract has the right budget numbers, has the right information, and then gets routed to the right place. And legal sits to certainly sign some contracts, but to support various different efforts of all of those 3 groups.
Yeah, and I think things on children's side are structured.
Dave, you're on
Right.
mute,
Oh,
but you're not.
can you hear me now?
Your mic has died,
That is not good.
or is my speaker died?
No, I can hear you, Dave.
It's me. It's me.
Okay.
Yeah, I can.
Go on. I
hear
can't
you.
hear anybody.
Sorry.
It's fine.
I've been having issues all week with Teams, so that scared me. So things are structured very similarly on the Cincinnati Children's side. The only difference really is that sponsored research and my team, we take points on all research related contracts. So your MTAs, NDAs, DTAs, SRAs, CTAs, they all go through my team. My team also takes point on sponsor initiated clinical trials, and we do the budgets for those. So outside of that, your business teams will work with you directly on your budgets for all other sponsored research. And then Justin's team in Innovation Ventures, he'll take point on like the licensing agreements, things along those lines. But other than that, we'll pull him in on IP negotiations and his team in on IP negotiations, and work with legal also on non-IP related issues.
I can hear again.
And Geoffrey, I think you got the rest of the slides.
I think so too. So again, we talked about these agreements before. You heard me sort of answer this in Tim's question, but who negotiates what, right? So CDAs and NDAs are handled at Cincinnati Children's by Dave's team. At UC, they're handled by my team. The statement of work is handled by you. The budget is handled by you, but with your department or your college, your business manager who knows or has the access to the Excel spreadsheet that can show you exactly what the total cost should be. IP terms, the lead negotiator at both institutions is sponsored research, but both sponsored research engages the 2 different offices, Justin's office and my office, as they need it. In the other terms, sponsored research gets help with from general counsel legal. So going back again, sort of answering Tim's question, right? What are your do's and don'ts? Do expect alignment on outcome. Don't expect the paths and processes to get there to always be the same. What works with one company will not necessarily translate to the other. Do engage openly. We are very happy to see faculty working with industry. Again, as I stated earlier, it creates some of the coolest and the best outcomes that are out there. But don't forget that the partner does have a profit-driven mission, right? They have a goal. They have shareholders who are expecting them to drive revenue, or investors. Do rely on us. Rely on your institutional support. Don't make promises you can't deliver. That includes budget and IP. And do build your network and contacts. It has a fantastic opportunity to help you as you grow your career, as you engage with various different peoples. It can absolutely have a huge impact on the opportunities for your science, both in terms of what you might be able to do in an industry collaboration, or even a partnership that leads to NIH, whether it's SBIR, STTR, or other grant mechanisms. And with that, are there any questions for us? And feel free to raise your hand, and we'll unmute yourself, or feel free to send a message in chat. And if you are worried about confidentiality or anything like that, feel free to just direct it directly to me in the chat, and I won't name any names.
All right, I have more questions. Can you talk about, conflicts of interest, what is reportable, but what's also perceived? So recently, like I was approached with Genentech to write a review article with other experts, and they weren't going to pay us, but they were going to have a scientific writer be a part of it, and I just didn't want to have at the bottom of the paper, this like article was supported by funding from Genentech, because I didn't want that perception that they were, even though in the contract they weren't allowed to influence the content, I didn't want that perception. So my question is to conflicts of interest, but also like at certain times in our career, conflicts can be detrimental, where other times maybe it could be seen as beneficial, where you're, industry's wanting to work with you, and how do you navigate that balance of conflicts of interest and everything like that? And maybe Meg or senior investigators can talk about that.
Yeah, so I'll start. So there's a variety of different places this comes up. Number one, our College of Medicine has for their own faculty, has an industry collaboration policy, focuses on a variety of different things, including ghostwriting and things like that. In addition, the institution has a much broader conflict management, conflict of interest leadership in our Office of Research. It's another resource to have a conversation with. They are focused often on exactly that concern, right? So at UC, if you are doing consulting, you need to submit and get that approved we have a system called the Outside Activity Reports, or the OAR, that gets routed through your leadership to obtain approval or ask or direct from the leadership of a conflict management plan. And conflict management plans, depending on what topic they're covering, usually cover one of two things: conflict of interest and conflict of commitment. Conflict of commitment is handled by the department, right? So that's handled with you and your department head or your division head on how your commitment to fulfilling your obligations to the university are met while being able to do this outside activity. The conflict management plan is often looking at, are you a consultant for the group that's funding your research? Are you a shareholder of that group? And there, they start looking at, okay, how might this impact your graduate students? How and in what ways, what steps can we take to help encourage transparency? To your point, Tim, the best combat to the perception of conflict is through transparency, right? And oftentimes the more the better. So perfect example, my spouse is a business manager for a newly created startup. So that creates for me a conflict because they are licensing intellectual property from the university. And so I have to be very careful in terms of, and the answer for me is to disclose it to everyone, right? If we are in some fashion doing business with that company, I am going to disclose to everyone that, hey, my spouse works for this company and you should all be aware. Oftentimes other places and other steps that we've seen put in place to protect are done to protect students in the labs. So for example, I had a faculty member who created a company around what was part of a student's thesis. And so to allow for them to create that company and continue working on it outside in the company, the student needed a co-chair to their thesis committee, right? Because the faculty member had a conflict and the student needed someone else to be able to go to if for some reason that conflict started impacting their ability to graduate and to get their degree. So oftentimes the biggest protections are focused on encouraging transparency and making sure that any students involved aren't somehow impacted or being abused is probably a strong word, misdirected down a path that they shouldn't be. Dave?
Yeah, I think you summed it up very well, Geoffrey. And I think the important takeaway there is get the right people involved in those conversations early on. Don't operate in a silo. We have policy and procedures and even teams on the COI side of things, so they can properly advise you on what actions need to happen or what plans need to be in place to make it possible. And I think that also brings up another good point, and not really related, but for those on the children's side, our Office of Research has a Centerlink page that has just a plethora of information on whatever it is you're working on, the pre-award, the agreement side, the post-award side. We have links to all of our compliance partners, a lot of job aids, training tools, things along those lines. So check that page out. There's a lot of information there available at your fingertips.
I have kind of, and I don't know, I mean, I feel like it's kind of an unusual question. I am in the Cancer Center in Research, and I'm also a two-time cancer survivor. So something I do is I participate in like focus groups for pharmaceutical companies as myself, the patient. Not saying anything about UC, just because of my disease. I don't have any, but some of them are like bigger, pharmaceutical companies that one day, I could potentially be partnering with, like Pfizer and Servier. Does that, I don't know if that counts as a conflict of interest, because when I'm participating in that, and then sometimes they ask me like to sit on like patient advisory groups and things like that. So I'm not getting paid. I'm providing them with feedback. One day, because I am a cancer researcher, like I could be going for funding from one of these companies, but like, what does that count? Like if I build these relationships in a patient advocate role, and then somehow it, like, I don't, if it doesn't cross over to research right now, does that make sense?
Yeah, most of the time the answer is focused on the return to the
Right.
person, right?
That's-
So if you're not being paid, if you're not getting some sort of in-kind contribution, that often is not, it is not something that's reportable.
And
right?
what if so one of them, like I signed an agreement to be on a like their patient advisory committee, right? But they haven't asked me to do anything, so I haven't gotten paid. Like, does that count as a conflict of interest? Like, if they asked me to do something, I think I would potentially, like, does that change it then?
So part of the answer, it likely requires a disclosure.
Okay.
Right, so the outside activity reports are due once a year, and that if you're serving on any sort of outside activity in any outside committee or
And just
anything
put it
like
there.
that.
Yeah,
Right,
I put it on
reporting
there, but I don't necessarily like list it when like I'm submitting to a journal and they say like, do you have conflicts of interest? Because I technically don't, like I haven't received any funding.
Yeah,
It's just confusing working in a same field that you're like affected by, because like I like to give back to research by participating in research because I'm a researcher, you know? And so I just always wonder, like, does that have any implications for in the future if I want to partner with industry? Like, would that be a hindrance?
It probably wouldn't, if you did partner with Pfizer and you are on Pfizer's patient committee, right? Patient success committee or patient treatment. I don't know the name of the committee.
Yeah.
But you are on that committee, then you would have to disclose it, right?
Yeah.
Because that is very clearly something
Right.
that would be a potential conflict, even if it's perception, right? If you hide it, it becomes more of an issue if you're being transparent, right? Because I think a lot of what you're describing is dealing with this perception of a conflict.
Right.
There may not actually be.
That's what but I just don't want to, and I like, you never know, because like I'm in the field that I also live in. And you know, I didn't know if that changed anything at all, because
the answer is that, and it may come down to, again, you're disclosing it on your OER that's an outside activity, and if and when you do get funding, there may need to be a plan, but that plan may simply, because of the dichotomy you're talking about, may simply have to consist of lots of transparency to others that, hey, yeah, I'm doing X, so you should be aware of that, but that has no, the results of my research aren't do not financially impact me through this relationship I have.
That's interesting. Thank you.
I think the other thing to consider is that I've seen in many industries, specifically on the clinical trial side, is that the sponsor in those instances will require you to disclose the fact that you're serving on the board. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. Thank you. And does industry count for some of our, like if it's nonprofit, so say you get like an American Cancer Society grant, would that count as industry, or is industry pretty much just like the corporate business side?
In what sense?
Like say I would get like a grant from somewhere like the American Cancer Society, and you know, you've got these different things related to IPs and how you said the culture is different and things like that. Would you say like some of the nonprofit funding space, would you say they fall into this same culture, or would you say that they fall more into like a different one when you're trying to work with them?
Yeah, it's a good question. So so to restate the question, where, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, federal government and grants, and we've talked a lot about industry, and then we have the not-for-profits. They have sort of, I would say, somewhere in between. Okay. Right. And Dave probably has a little bit more experience, so I'll let him talk about that.
Right.
But
I just didn't know if it fell under.
No, it's a cool question. So I would say that in terms of IP, they aren't focused on ownership. They are focused on making sure that the results benefit their cause, right? So if, for example, I don't remember which one, the American Cancer Society or American Heart Association, we get lots of grants from both. What we often see is that if there is IP, we have to report it. And if we successfully commercialize it, then they get a share of the return so that it can go back to benefit. And they have a right oftentimes to make sure that it's actually being commercialized, and can encourage us to make sure that it's not sitting on a shelf and just generating revenue. What it's doing is being used towards their focus mission. But I think, and Dave, you'll be the best when it comes to timelines and things like that. They're a little bit closer to industry than they are than say an NIH.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the biggest thing with foundations for us is marketing and use of name. They often want a very broad permission up front to use whoever's name, whatever video recording, trademarks, whatever. And unfortunately, that's not something that we can give without having our marketing and trade teams involved up front. So that's usually the hangups with those agreements.
Thank you.
I have two more questions. Sorry to bug you. So with developing the budget, I'm used to developing like, NIH budgets, right? Where there's never enough money. So I would assume you should try to shoot high with working with some of these big industries that probably have the cash to do it. And if they come back and say that's too expensive, that's fine, but don't sell yourself short. Would you say definitely make sure there's enough money to cover all research costs, all personnel?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to, again, depend on the circumstance. If you're dealing with a small startup company, shooting high might scare them away. But it's always good to start at a position where you have some room to negotiate. Making sure you have that overhead in and all your costs is important. I mean, there may be instances where we want to cost share, but that's not the norm.
And are you all able to provide a little context based on some of the contracts you've done in the past with these companies to say like, oh, no, Genentech, Pfizer, they're obviously big versus this company that has like 20 employees, maybe a little different?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If you've got a company that you're not sure about, we can pull old contracts and old budgets and take a look at those and advise you on where to start for sure.
Oh, and then my last question. Sometimes I feel like, do people ever engage in a relationship with industry with the hope that by forming a relationship, you could then go to them in the future for funding your research? So for example, maybe it's not a product that I love, but by knowing these people, I can then reach out to them to say, hey, I have a product, I need like 50 to 100,000 K. Like, would you all be able to like help with that? So I don't know. I don't know if you see that that's a wise thing. I'm just always trying to think through the future to bring in multiple funding streams.
All the time.
Mm-hmm.
Right? As with any relationship that you're trying to build, you often don't want to run to the end point. You need to build trust and build success, so that way, because again, it's all about proving that you can do what you say you can do, and on both sides, right? So there are lots of faculty who will take on small projects with the idea of building the relationship, so that way, as they show the proof of their ability to deliver and meet what the needs of the company are, that they can continue going back to, oh, hey, we did X, now let's do Y. And it doesn't always work because, again, companies are profit driven, they have budgets, they have controls, and it's often very interesting to see, the larger the company, sometimes different units within those companies operate completely differently as well. But that is absolutely a strategy that lots of faculty I've seen used, and it certainly works. And again, all depends on the parties on both sides, but it certainly works, and it's certainly a good place to start, because organic growth is far easier than, oh yeah, we all agreed to a $10 million project and now no one can deliver and now everyone's pissed off.
Yeah, and on the sponsored research side, we're not going to analyze your budget. We're going to check to make sure you have the appropriate F&A and things along those lines. But it's really up to the faculty and the business manager or the business team to have those conversations early on and strategize on how you want to approach that. That's really up to the determination on that side versus the sponsored research side.
I just want to say thank you, because this is like a very important topic that is, for whatever reason, not talked about nearly as much as your standard academic, building a research program component. Or at least I feel like I have to like reach out to people, and not all fields of medicine have relationships with industry. Like, I'm an emergency medicine doctor. We don't develop devices, pharmaceuticals, right? So like my mentors don't have experience with industry, but my allergy colleagues, they all do. So it feels a little foreign. So it's been really invaluable. Thanks for being so open and such great resources.
Absolutely, anytime. Feel free to reach out whenever you have questions or issues.
Now, if I have a contract issue with my contractor at home with my addition, can I reach out to you, Dave, or no? Okay.
You could try.
We will say no.
And thank you to the speakers and for Tim in particular, who reached out and asked for this topic to be presented. So if you are part of the group listening and attending today, we really do pay attention to your requests in trying to come up with speakers that you think would be most relevant. And to that end, our next one, we are trying to nail down a date in April, will be a panel of faculty who have sat on K-level study sections. So they'll be able to tell you about what that's like and what issues tend to be most discussed, and it varies by institute. So we're trying to get a good panel together, but stay tuned for that. And it looks like somebody has their hand raised. I'm gonna
Meg, if
go
I may, and I'll ask this, Deb, I've got you. So Deb's part of the children's team. So this is for both Dave and I. What is the best way, right? To Tim's point, we don't talk about this often enough. What is the best way to get you this information? Right. Obviously, this is a really good opportunity. We do it often one-on-one when people raise their hand and realize they need to ask the question. But, you know, to the group, are there better ways for us to engage you with this information than, oh, it's up on a website somewhere, you know, doing presentations like this where we have to take your busy, you know, find time in your busy schedules to get you to be available. Are there other ways that we can get you this information?
Yeah, I think, you know, staff meetings, you know, like in different divisions, I think especially those divisions that work with industry more, you know what I mean? Like oncology, like probably saying like, hey, could we present at your faculty meeting just as a reminder, right? You know, about this, because I think there's a lot of people that have probably never been formally heard this or know the resources that are out there. So I think those faculty meetings are like a really nice foray and to speak about this.
Yeah, always happy to come to faculty meetings. We don't actively engage, I guess, in going to those, but if you guys make the request, we're happy to come and chat informally about any topic.